Everything's Coming Up Yoshi's on the second episode of Mode 7. The NES launch hinged on Mario, no question about it. As we've seen in Good Intentions 1985, the NES launch lineup served as the culmination of more than 2 years of Nintendo learning the ropes of the console business, with the end result being Super Mario Bros. Quite easily the largest, deepest, most refined, most spectacular action game ever produced to that point. Nintendo propelled the NES forward thanks in large part to maintaining Mario's incredible momentum. They retooled the suspiciously Mario-like disk system platformer Doki Doki Panic as Super Mario Bros. 2 right as the NES hit critical mass in the US, giving American fans a Mario sequel that pushed fewer boundaries but felt marvelously imaginative. When Super Mario Bros. 3 arrived a year and a half later, Nintendo ensured that it would be a cultural event with a massive marketing campaign that painted it as such. Oh, and a Hollywood movie release that effectively served as a multi-million-dollar big-screen preview for the game. You better bet your sweet bippy that they weren't leaving anything to chance when it came time to introduce the NES's successor. Mario had catapulted the NES to the top of the charts, and this time the plucky little guy would be there for the Super NES's debut in all regions, not just America and Europe, but Japan as well. Heck, the connection was right there in the name. This was the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. Could anyone less than Super Mario take the lead? I can't find a precise date to detail when Nintendo R&D 3 began developing the Super NES under the guidance of NES creator Masayuki Uemura, but it had to have been 1988, if not before that. 1988 was when Nintendo and Sony signed a contract to co-develop a CD-ROM add-on for the 16-bit console, so it stands to reason the machine was already deep in development by that point. 1988 would also be the point at which Nintendo R&D 4, now known as Entertainment Analysis and Development, began planning software with which to support the new system's launch. Shigeru Miyamoto would oversee the teams responsible for 4 of the 5 games that debuted along the Super NES in America. Everything except third-party release Gradius 3, basically. Nintendo EAD wrapped development on Super Mario Bros. 3 in late summer 1988, and the game arrived on Famicom in October of that year. By all appearances, that marked the end of Miyamoto's serious involvement with the 8-bit behemoth. EAD would release only 2 more titles for Famicom Disk System after Super Mario Bros. 3, the excellent Disk System overhaul of Excitebike vs. Excitebike in December of 1988, and a Journey to the West-inspired adventure largely produced by Pax Softnica the following October. Meanwhile, EAD's core teams began pouring their efforts into learning the ropes of the Super NES and developing games that would show its capabilities to full effect. As a result, Miyamoto didn't ship a game for more than 2 years until the new console debuted in Japan as the Super Famicom on November 21st, 1990. When he did ship at last though, what games? The Super Famicom arrived with only 2 games in tow, but those 2 pieces of software were the visually stunning White Knuckle Racer F-Zero, which showed off the console's faux 3D capabilities to excellent effect, and a new standard in platform gaming, Super Mario World. Nintendo EAD created in its twin Super NES launch games a carefully calculated strategic statement. The 2 titles complemented one another on a fundamental, conceptual level. Where F-Zero offered a breathtaking new arcade-style racing experience never before seen on a home console, Super Mario World told a different story. This was not a new experience, but rather a comfortable, known quantity done in a fresh way. Here is what your familiar 8-bit action games will be like in this new 16-bit world, was the message Super Mario World broadcast to gamers. As a result, Super Mario World actually felt less freewheeling and wild than Super Mario Bros. 3 had on NES. Where the previous game had spanned 90 levels, many quite unique, Super Mario World tracked players' progress as they searched for 96 exits. but those appeared in a much smaller set of levels, with most stages containing multiple exits. Where F-Zero felt insanely recklessly fast, Super Mario World adopted a slower, more methodical pace. Its stages placed less emphasis on the breakneck action of Mario 3 in favor of an exploratory style, which is where those 96 exits came into play. For the first time, a Mario game centered not simply on conquest, but upon mastery. The idea behind every Mario Odyssey to this point had been to dash from the starting point to the end of the game as quickly as possible, uncovering secrets along the way that would allow for shortcuts in subsequent playthroughs. Even Mario 3, with its sprawling expanse of stages, never let players record their progress. Super Mario Bros. May have been designed as the ultimate action game for the NES console, but its heart, and that of its sequels, really belonged in the arcade. Super Mario World, on the other hand, felt intrinsically like a console game. It featured a save function for the first time in any Mario game, something Nintendo had actually stripped out of Doki Doki Panic when it became Super Mario Bros. 2 in America. Defeat an enemy stronghold or claim a significant world-changing map point, such as a Switch Palace, and the game would prompt you to save your progress. When players launched into a play session, a small counter on their save file denoted the number of exits they had uncovered across their sessions. For the first time in Mario's universe, persistence existed. And exploration mattered. This new mentality would actually work against the game to some degree. Sega wasted no time in taking on the American Super NES launch head-on with the Sonic the Hedgehog campaign that mocked Mario and his amiable meandering. Sonic was fast, fun, fresh, and new. Mario was old, fat, slow, and tired. The Super NES was chronically unhip, with its rounded purple buttons compared to Sega's angular, glossy black Genesis. And in all fairness, Super Mario World really did represent what the future held for Super NES. Certainly more so than F-Zero did. While the futuristic racer certainly wasn't the only fast-paced game ever to appear on the console, the system's pokey processor and specialized hardware didn't really lend themselves to brisk arcade-style action. Shooters, racers, and sports games would become trademarks of the competition, the Genesis and TurboGrafx. Super NES would play home to leisurely platformers, adventure games, and RPGs. But even if, to some degree, Super Mario World highlighted the console's shortcomings, it also showed off its strengths. This may not have been a radical revolution in platformer design, but it demonstrated how the advanced features of 16-bit consoles could enhance and enrich traditional game experiences. In this way, too, Super Mario World presaged the general Super NES experience, where the NES and the N64 afterwards staked out Nintendo's place in 2 ages of enormous video game technology and design advancements. The Super NES belonged to a generation that favored evolution and iteration over revolution and innovation. Most of what we would play on Super NES and Genesis amounted to grand, beefed-up renditions of concepts and franchises that had gotten their start in the latter half of the 80s. And Super Mario World definitely felt that way. An extraordinary interpretation of the Mario games, amped up to an impressive degree, with all the rough edges sanded down until it absolutely glowed. Even the production process behind Super Mario World tied the game to its forebears. Nintendo EAD began production on it as soon as they wrapped Super Mario Bros. 3, and the very earliest screenshots of Mario World in development bear a keen resemblance to Mario 3. Some beta version screens believed to date from 1989 even carry forward Mario 3 elements. This includes the raccoon tail power-up, 8-bit style Goombas that bear no resemblance to the rounded versions that would show up in the final release, and even enemies like Paragoombas that never made it into the finished game. The production team was similarly 8-bit in size. Miyamoto and Takashi Tezuka headed up a team of a mere 16 people who spent 3 years designing the game. While the time element would have been unheard of for an NES game, which usually took about 6 to 9 months to produce, the team size was fairly typical for a latter-era NES project. Eventually, though, the game evolved from the NES-like Super Mario Bros. 4, as it says on the Japanese title screen, to the distinctly Super NES-based Super Mario World. It included many features never before seen in the series. There was more to the 16-bit feel of the game than its lithium battery, something present in only a handful of NES games but which would grow increasingly common over the lifespan of the Super NES. Super Mario World also featured enormous sprites, transparency effects, fluid scrolling in all directions, rich audio, and, of course, Yoshi. Shigeru Miyamoto had famously wanted Mario to ride a dinosaur ever since the original Super Mario Bros. This proved to be impractical on NES, likely due to sprite rendering limitations. Instead, the NES Mario game centered on Mario's innate abilities and power-ups, culminating in the incredible menagerie of animal-based powers that featured in Super Mario Bros. 3, Frog, Tanuki, Raccoon, and Hammer Brother. Super Mario World greatly scaled back Mario's skill set, trimming it to the Fire Flower and the new flight mechanic, the Feather and Cape. This didn't mean Mario World would come up short in terms of features and mechanics, though. In place of the Mario 3 skill suite, Mario had that long-awaited dinosaur pal, Yoshi. It probably would have been enough for Yoshi to simply show up a few times throughout the game and give Mario a lift, like the flying carpets and fire cannons in Super Mario Bros. 2. But in classic Super Mario style, Miyamoto and his team wanted to make this new addition truly count. Rather than simply being a ride for Mario, Yoshi greatly expanded Mario's repertoire of abilities. In fact, he represented the single biggest addition to the series' mechanics since the advent of Mario's so-good jump physics in Super Mario Bros. All the things Mario could do, Yoshi enhanced. Riding Yoshi, you could still perform Mario's basic actions like jumping and attacking, but now Mario could leap off of Yoshi in midair to gain extra height. Anytime you dismounted the dinosaur, he'd simply chill out and patiently wait for Mario. Of course, you could also be a ruthless bastard and hop off Yoshi over a pit to effect a last-minute save, while sending your hapless partner plummeting to his death. Pits aside though, Yoshi was basically indestructible. Taking damage while on Dino Back would cause Yoshi to skitter away manically, leaving Mario behind, but Mario himself wouldn't take damage, and Yoshi would eventually be fine too. And while your Dino Pal could run blindly into a pit or something after being set free, he'd otherwise reverse course if he hit a wall or a pipe. So if that happened, you could hop onto his back again on the rebound. His heavy stompin' boots allowed him to walk safely over objects that would inflict grievous harm on Mario, bouncing safely off of spikes or spinies. Most of Yoshi's capabilities, however, involved his voracious appetite. By pressing the attack button while riding Yoshi, players would cause him to lash out with his lengthy prehensile tongue, grabbing and swallowing enemies and other objects alike. Yoshi could snatch enemies out of the air and even gulp piranha plants ensconced in their pipes. For the most part, gobbling another critter would simply take it out of play, but the rules changed when Koopa Troopas came into play. Rather than gulping down a Koopa, Yoshi would instead hold its shell in his mouth. For a green Koopa, this would simply allow him to spit the shell ahead, with the same result as if Mario had punted it himself. Other Koopas, however, had different effects, assuming you could ever find them. The most common alternate Koopa Troopa, of course, was the red Koopa. When Yoshi spat out a red shell, it would sublimate somehow into a triple spread of fireballs, like he had suddenly become Count Dracula or something. The much rarer yellow Koopa, on the other hand, would allow Yoshi to create a seismic impact anytime he landed from a jump, as if he had hit a classic Mario Bros. POW block. And the precious blue Koopa would enable Yoshi to straight up fly for as long as he could hold the shell in his mouth. Each of these powers had innate limitations. Yoshi would reflexively swallow a shell after a while, so it was important not to be, say, hovering over a bottomless pit when he gulped down the blue shell. Although some of these capabilities appeared only a few times throughout the game, some of the most interesting levels were built around them, and some of the most esoteric hidden exits depended on their mastery. Yoshi also came in a variant baby form that was more or less useless when it hatched. Rather than riding around on a baby Yoshi, Mario would instead give the infant a ride, holding it ahead of himself. Once it had consumed a few enemies though, the baby would turn into a full-fledged adult Yoshi. Unlike the standard green grown Yoshi model, pupating baby-type Yoshis came in a variety of colors. And those Yoshis possessed by nature the powers typically only conferred by turtle shells. So long as one of those dinosaurs could snag a turtle shell of any color, they could perform the feats denoted by the color of their own hide. For the most part, many of Yoshi's most esoteric abilities only showed up in the hidden areas of the game, such as the Star Road, along with many of Super Mario World's stranger curiosities, like the Pea Balloon and the 3-Up Moon. Nevertheless, Yoshi's basic skills and capabilities were woven into the fabric of the entire game, which EAD designed around twin possibilities: Mario with Yoshi and without. The game was therefore a masterclass in level design, and that's not even getting into advanced capabilities like flight. Players could do a ridiculous number of things in Super Mario World, allowing them to approach the game as they pleased. This has the side effect of causing many people to regard Super Mario World as one of the easiest Mario games ever. That's not entirely untrue. Again, though, the point of this adventure wasn't to experience a raw challenge as with earlier Super Mario outings, but rather to work your way through every obscure nook and cranny of the game. There's one final noteworthy production factoid that merits mention about Super Mario World. This was the first true Super Mario game to hold the same place for both Japanese and Western gamers. Remember, the original Super Mario Bros. Was a launch title for the American and European NES, but it showed up well into the Japanese Famicom's life. Super Mario Bros. 2 was a completely different game across regions. Super Mario Bros. 3 debuted in Japan almost 2 years ahead of its overseas counterpart. And while Super Mario Land was a Game Boy launch title everywhere, that was an oddball game by a different team and did nothing to advance the core Mario universe. Super Mario World, on the other hand, appeared at the Super NES launch in every region. It was there day one to help demonstrate the potential inherent in Nintendo's new console, and to show how the company's leading man could put 16-bit power to use. It wasn't necessarily the most stunning game to appear at the Super NES's launch, but it was by far the deepest. And of all the releases to come along in the console's infancy, Super Mario World has held up the best, and remains the most playable 25 years later. And next time on Mode 7, we'll look at the game itself. Yeah, this was just the warm-up act.